Commission meeting of May 10th, 2022 to order. Roll call.
Hannah here.
Grillo here.
Kupczynski here.
Lorick here.
Kurzakowski here.
Oldani here. Super here.
Chandler here.
And Mayor Bukevich is excused. Before we start, an announcement on item E. It was requested by the applicant to hold item E. It was held kind of last minute, so there wasn't enough time to send out notice to any residents. So if anybody here is for item E, it is held for a future meeting. Item 3, approval of minutes from April 26, 2022.
Super moves to approve the minutes of April 26, 2022.
Hannah seconds.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Hannah.
Hannah, aye. Grillo, aye.
Kupczynski, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Kurzakowski.
Oldani, aye. Super aye.
Chandler, aye. Alderman Guzikowski, I don't believe your microphone is on. It is on now.
There it is. Thank you. Item 4, significant common council actions. Carrie?
Council approved the following: an ordinance approving a conditional use permit for a car wash facility on the property at 140 West Putes Road. A resolution approving the Lakeshore Commons Master Condominium Plat and the residences and clubhouse at Lakeshore Commons Condominium Plat, submitted by F Street Development for the property at 4005 East Lake Vista Parkway. The following council president aldermanic appointments were made: Alderman Lorick and Alderman Guzikowski to the Plan Commission, Alderman Guzikowski to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and also the following mayoral appointments were approved: Christine Hanna and Chauncey Chandler to the Plan Commission, Stacy Hen to BOZA, and Richard Yerke to BOZA, that's the Board of Housing and Zoning Appeals. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 5, Board of Housing and Zoning Appeal actions. There are none. Item 6, quarterly Parks and Recreation Commission actions. The next report will be June 28th, 2022. That brings us to item 7, new business. 7A, a rezone planned unit development. Review a request submitted by CR Devco LLC to rezone to and establish a planned unit development on portions of the property at 2231 and 1933 West Putes Road, 8843 South 13th Street, and 8950 South 20th Street. Carrie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a rezone and PUD request, and the current zoning is in multiple districts. However, Plan Commissioners will recall that there was a certified survey map that reconfigured and redivided these properties. The rezone request is to RD1 to two-family residential with a planned unit development on Lot 1 of that CSM to be recorded. That CSM was approved by the council on March 15th of this year. The official map amendment that is going to be reconfiguring, or the proposal to reconfigure some of those future street patterns throughout the properties, is scheduled for a hearing before the Common Council on May 17th. So to acquaint you with where we are talking about this evening, it is only Lot 1 as shown on the screen per that certified survey map that is affected by the rezone and PUD before you tonight. On the screen right now is the concept development plan. This is considered the general development plan for the PUD. It does show future public streets, that connection to Putes Road from the north, connecting down to the development on the east side of the property. The public portion will terminate in essentially a cul-de-sac roundabout with a private development road that extends off of that cul-de-sac. 20th Street, as previously mentioned in other reviews, will have the cul-de-sac extended onto the development parcel, but it will be gated for emergency access only. The proposal includes 134 single-family residences, and that is in a 4, 6, and 8 unit configuration in 22 ranch-style buildings. There will be one leasing and mail office that is at the beginning of the development on the north, so that'll be accessed off of Putes Road. As previously mentioned, remaining lands to the west, so lots 2 through 4 of that CSM to be recorded, are not part of this rezone and PUD request. There is no proposal for development of those lots at this time. Included in the PUD are cottage home models. That's kind of the design of the models that incorporate some craftsman style as well. They range in size from about 830 square feet to about 1,700 square feet. Materials include vinyl in various configurations, a brick base throughout the entirety of the building itself, and asphalt shingles. There will be a development agreement required due to the extension of public streets in this development. Each of the cottage home models will have an attached 1 or 2 car garage. Single bedroom units will have an oversized attached 1 car garage. In any configuration, they will provide direct access to the living space of the building. They are all attached. And each of the buildings for each of the units has a 22-foot long apron for additional parking of vehicles. Minimum parking requirements are 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and a minimum of 1 of those parking stalls needs to be within a garage space. That would require 276 overall parking stalls for the PUD, and with those aprons that can accommodate up to about 2 vehicles each, and each of the garages meeting those minimum requirements, the development itself exceeds the minimum parking requirements per code. There is a variation request, as the code currently does not allow for vinyl siding or vinyl components as exterior building materials. Staff does not have any issue with the approval of the deviation if the Plan Commission sees no issue with it. These are going to be incorporating green building standards, which is also supported by the code, which is why staff do not have any concerns with the use of vinyl. On the screen right now is a breakdown of what was just presented, essentially. There are 6 unit configurations within the various buildings. You can see the total living spaces and the percentages for each of the bedroom configurations and the garages and driveway spaces for the overall development. There was a reduction, so I believe that the 276 for the PUD is actually reduced. So because there's 134 units with the garage spaces as configured and the driveway spaces, there are no concerns with the overall parking counts. On the screen right now are concept elevations showing what the configured buildings would look like. Again, attached units. However, they are in a single-story, single-family, private walk-up entry configuration. There are various models that would look very similar but provide that overall cohesiveness in the development while still allowing for some variation in color and materials. And on the screen right now is an example of how those two-car garages are attached in a 2-bedroom configuration. It's split up a little bit so that you can get a better idea. This would be the overall configuration here on the left, and the garage area, and then the parking area. So it shows really that 4 parking stalls are provided for a 2-bedroom unit. And this happens to be a 1,457 square foot unit. So that's an average of a 2-bedroom unit for the development. There are a couple of revisions that would need to happen should this be recommended for approval. Stormwater and grading plans may need to have some revisions. And there is a requirement for a tree preservation, removal, and inventory plan. That's pre and post development, so the applicants are aware of that requirement. There is also currently discussions going on with Sewer PAC regarding the secondary environmental corridor. There has been DNR approval of wetland fill permits. There's one small pocket of wetland that would be filled to accommodate the development road. So we are anticipating Sewer PAC's determination relatively shortly. They've been out on the property in the last 2 weeks. Just to remind the Plan Commission, the initial recommendation of approval of this PUD and rezone is not an endorsement of any site plan that has been presented before you. Any specific site, building, landscaping, or other approvals that would be required as part of the PUD conditions and restrictions, those would be something that would be brought back to the Plan Commission for those specific approvals. Included in your packets were also something new as part of the code, and those are standards for review. Those are what you must base your findings upon when you make your decision for the rezone and PUD. With that in mind, there is a suggested motion for consideration on the screen. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carrie. So this item is discussing the rezone of the property. Does the applicant have any comments to make, or will they just wait for questions? Okay. And this isn't a public hearing, but we typically let residents speak if they have anything to say. Are there any residents that would like to speak? If so, please come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Elwood Fawcett, 9040 South 20th Street. I own the property immediately south of the development. And I just have a couple questions on your procedures. You mentioned again tonight about the limited access to South 20th Street being emergency only. And at one point, there's also discussion about no access to Gray's Lane. How will those requirements be implemented?
20th Street will be a cul-de-sac that partially goes on to the development, and it will be gated. So that is a requirement of both the site plan, the PUD approval. If that goes forward, it'll be in the conditions and restrictions, which would be the next step of this review. And it's also gated. That would be coordinated with the fire department so that they maintain their access. So whatever their requirements are for that gate, that would have to go forward. There's no proposal, nor is there any requirement to connect to Gray's Lane. So there wouldn't be a prohibition per se incorporated into the conditions and restrictions, but there's also no approval for a connection to Gray's Lane.
Okay. When you say that the requirement would be part of the PUD approval, does that become part of spelled out in a resolution that's passed by the Common Council?
It's part of conditions and restrictions that would be part of an ordinance. That's correct.
Okay. Would those restrictions also apply to construction traffic?
There would be no access that would be other than emergency. So no construction traffic would be able to utilize 20th Street for the development.
Good. Just one other question. You mentioned that there may be some requirements or some changes to the grading plan and the stormwater plan. And I do have a couple concerns regarding those items. I know it's really not part of the zoning approval, but I just want to point them out because it makes a difference to me on if I'm in favor of the zoning or not. The grading plan for the site appears to change the boundaries of the tributary area to Southland Creek. It appears to enlarge them, which would increase the flow to the south. The discharge from the south detention basin is into the wetlands. No problem with that. We want to keep water in the wetlands and keep them viable. But between the change in the boundaries and the increased flow, it'll increase the water going into the wetlands. And there's no conveyance directly to Southland Creek. That's basically the way it is now, except now there's going to be an increase in the volume of water. That wetland is not entirely on the developer's property. It extends onto mine. It goes across the property line. I'm not opposed to it going the way it normally did. I'm not opposed to the flow, not rate of flow, the total volume of flow before the development. It's natural. It should go that way. The other concern I've got is that you said there's been people out on the site. Hopefully they looked at the entire site, but there's an erosion problem. The wetland that they're discharging to is approximately 5 or 6 feet above the flow line of Southland Creek. And right at the southeast corner of the property, there's currently an erosion problem. The bank is eroding back to the north. And that something should be done to stabilize that. I know it's a little touchy. It's in the wetland area. I don't know if they can touch that or not, but it should be stabilized. Otherwise, it's just going to progress. It's not a result of the farming that was done on the site or anything else. It's as a result of the DOT construction or reconstruction of I-94. They disturbed the area and they did not provide any erosion control. And it's progressively getting worse. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Else?
Barbara Linder, 2411 West Putes Road. I know it's not for today, but next to our property, it was listed RD1. Now that would be where they could do multiple, like he wants to build over there, right next to my house. Now, we have opposed any multiple because that always was a single family for a single family resident. And always before, Oak Creek would have, if you're going to go into multifamilies, you would have to have a barrier of a 2-family. You couldn't go 4-family and just rezone it in R1. And that isn't fair to like our property because see, he basically could put so many, the whole length of our property, we got 660 feet deep, plus behind us and a single family home for 1 family, I would have no objections to. But multi like this, and I don't care if you classify it with saying it's single family residence, it's not. And we have enough in Oak Creek of apartments everywhere. And to us, that's wrong. And the way things are right now, they got it listed, the whole length of our property for that R1. And which it should not be. I mean, we've lived on that property almost our entire life. My husband especially has lived on that property his entire life. We would never want to live here if we had the whole property lined with apartments. It would not be fair to us as to have that put on to us. So I would like that known. Because as far as that zoning goes, that should have never, you should never allow that because it was never meant that way. I mean, we do know from the time we purchased the property, his parents purchased the property, we knew what was going to go on around us. And I have nothing against development, but you should do it the right way. And I mean, across the street, we had to go with that, everything, part of that was done wrong. We were told those were going to be beautiful condos, as they would be 90% mason and brick. Look at them. And we had them sinking in front of our house. You know, it was just not what we were promised. So when the new developer comes in, we really don't have too much faith that what you say you're going to do, you're going to do. Because we've dealt with the Honadale property. And we had no objections to that in the beginning. And we said, go ahead, do this. And this is what we got.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
So just a point of clarification, the only portion of the property that we are discussing tonight for rezoning and including in the PUD is Lot 1, which is outlined on the screen in yellow. Anything to the west is not changing at this time. That is currently zoned in lots 2 and 3 as single-family residential, and Lot 4 is zoned B4, which is highway business. Those zoning districts, as they are currently existing, are not changing at this time. It is only Lot 1 that is pertaining to this proposal this evening.
Thank you. We will turn it over to commission, starting from my left, Commissioner Hannah.
Yes, so to kind of clarify and for me to visualize here, Carrie, when you say Lot 1, okay, let me back up a little bit. I used to live on Putes and closer to 13th Street, across from those condos that you see on that corner of 27 and Putes. I don't know where's your north. Okay, to the south side of Putes, there is a big wetland there. Is this part of that Lot 1?
What's on the screen right now is the concept development plan, and you can't really see it very well, but there is a wetland line that kind of, if you follow my cursor, goes along here.
Where's Pewds on the screen?
Pewds is to the north.
Okay.
Here. So that wetland configuration, for the most part, except for where the road is crossing, is going to be preserved. And DNR has already issued permits for the impact for the installation of the road. Now, that road is partially in. There is already an access that is there, but to construct the actual road access, they've granted a permit for those crossings. The rest of it is preserved.
Okay, and the drainage for this facility impeding on that wetland has been looked at?
Well, that's part of the requirement for the stormwater and the grading plan to be revised, because there are some considerations in terms of meeting local requirements for those things that, those require the changes in the plan. So we will make sure that those concerns are raised to the engineering department.
And how the boundary of this wetland is going to be preserved to ensure that this development, either during construction or later on, is going to be preserved?
Well, one, we have the requirement in code that there's a 15-foot setback. 5 feet of that has to remain undisturbed, and DNR still has jurisdiction over wetlands. So whatever they have approved, that's the extent of the wetland impact.
But there would be no fence or anything to separate that?
There's nothing proposed at this time. There may be actually a couple of retaining walls that would be required in strategic spots in the development that would maybe visually give a cue, but nothing that would actually delineate the boundary of the wetland itself. It would just remain in its natural form.
That would be my concern, for that to remain unprotected for one way or the other, especially with that type of development out there.
There's no requirement in code for wetland delineation to include any kind of fencing or anything like that. So all of these proposed buildings meet those setback requirements, and that would be something that, as part of the building plan, they would have to submit all of their grading for each of the pads, and they would have to submit all of their plans for each of the buildings to ensure that the foundations and everything are in the locations that they need to be. So there are checks and balances, even if there's no fencing requirement or visual delineation of those wetlands. I'll defer to the developer.
I believe we have the applicant. Just name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Josh Walreich, 313 Surrey Lane in Lake Forest, Illinois. So Carrie had mentioned the setback from the wetlands. We've actually expanded that through working with Sewer Pack and DNR. Our setback is 75 feet minimum, and we've actually removed 2 buildings that were within that 75-foot setback, which is why previously, if you recall, we were at 138 units. Now we're at 134, to make sure that we were, I would say, overly cautious about the impact that would happen to that wetland.
Okay. I had another question. There is a trail here in this area crossing Pewds. How is that going to be preserved?
I don't believe that's an official trail.
I know, but it's still a lot of people use it in those facilities.
This is private property. It's not designated as a public trail. So that would be something that if the developer would wish to designate it as a public trail, that would be their prerogative.
Okay, the last question I have, the driveway access from Pewds. Okay, so has this been looked at? How is this going to impact the traffic overall?
There's already an access there. It's kind of not, I wouldn't want to say unofficial, but there is a driveway access there, and it's actually going to become a public road, so it would have to be designed to public standards.
Yeah, I just want to make sure when that being designed, that the traffic volume and the forecast volume for this is being accounted for.
We've already incorporated the requirement for acceleration and deceleration lanes on Pewds Road, and the applicant is aware of those requirements.
Is there access from 27th Street?
Not at this time, no.
Will there ever be?
If there's ever any future access from 27th Street per WISDOT's access management plan, they'd have to be shared access with the existing motel property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carrillo.
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Kipchinsky.
Nothing for me.
Alderman Guzekowski. Nothing for me. Commissioner O'Donnell.
No questions.
Commissioner Siebert.
No questions.
Commissioner Chandler.
I do have a question for the applicant.
And can you provide a little more information in regards to, we had a couple residents with concerns, one about the grading plan and then the other with the erosion issue?
Sure. I think when the appropriate time comes when we receive the official comments, from staff's review of the stormwater and all of those things, which, as I understand, comes at the next step, we'll make sure to have the engineering team that we're using look at that, and whatever we need to do to conform with the standards and the requirements, we'll make sure that we do. The erosion is something new to us, and if we're able to restore that, since it is in a wetland, and anytime you go into a wetland, it requires DNR approval and sometimes Army Corps of Engineer approval, we'll look into what we can do to try to restore that.
Okay, and then the other resident had questions about the barrier with the current single-family houses versus the RD1 two-family
Sure.
residential area. Could you provide a little more information on the?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Carrie did a fantastic job. We're developing lot 1 only. We have no plans right now to develop lots 2, 3, or 4. There's a lot of challenges to developing those sites, and we had originally looked at possibly developing that portion of the site. We thought that there was an opportunity for everything that's closer to 94 to be a higher density product like you see across from IKEA. That was our original plan when we had started looking at the property, and we had to modify the plan based on all of the issues and all the challenges of the site, which are many, given that's the main reason why this has sat undeveloped for so long. So with the challenges in place on lots 2 and 3, we don't have any current plans to develop that portion of this property.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a question for clarification. I believe it'll be for Carrie. So with the rezone, the property is already, it's not half and half, but it's already RS2 and RD1, correct? So this would rezone and make the entire piece RD1, the entire lot 1.
Lot 1 is, you're partially correct. A majority of lot 1 is currently RD1. So this, if you can see my cursor, this area that is basically a rectangle, that's already RD1. What we're talking about is the access from Putes Road and the rest of lot 1 in orange here. So it's approximately a third of lot 1 that would still need to be rezoned. And that's the only part that will be rezoned. Now, all of lot 1 will be in a PUD, but lots 2, 3, and 4 are excluded from this review.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no other questions from commission, I will look for a motion on item 7A.
Zakowski will make a motion to, hold on here. That the Plan Commission recommends the Common Council that portions of the properties at 2231 West Putes Road and 8843 South 13th Street and 8950 South 20th Street be rezoned to RD1 two-family residential, no chain to floodway, FF flood fringe or C1 shoreland wetland conservancy districts with the planned unit development after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions that will be prepared for the commission's review at their next meeting on May 22nd, 24th.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Carrillo.
Zinsky, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Zakowski, aye.
O'Donnell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chamber, aye. Anna, aye.
That brings us to item B in new business, a certified survey map. Review a certified survey map submitted by Mark Verhalen dividing the property at 500 East Oakwood Road. Lori?
Thank you, Alderman Lorik. The property at 500 East Oakwood is zoned RS3, single-family residential. This proposal is to divide the property into 3 separate lots, all of which conform to the dimensional standards and requirements for the RS3 zoning district. Lot 1, which you can see on the left, is currently developed with a single-family residence. There's also a 6-foot wide public utility easement that will remain along the rear property line. And that's all I have. A motion has been provided for your consideration.
Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to say? Just want to wait for questions?
I'll wait for questions.
Okay. So we'll go to commission, starting from my right with Commissioner Chandler.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Seifert,
No questions.
Commissioner Oldani,
No questions.
Alderman Guzekowski,
No questions.
Commissioner Kipchinsky,
Nothing from engineering.
Commissioner Carrillo,
Nothing for me.
and Commissioner Hannah.
Just one question. So this is east of Howell? Correct? And this is where this golf site is? No questions.
Okay. And I have no questions. So I will look for a motion on 7B.
Donnie moves that the Plan Commission recommends to the Common Council that the certified survey map submitted by Mark Verhalen for the property at 500 East Oakwood Road be approved with the following condition: that all technical corrections, including but not limited to spelling errors, minor coordinate, geometry corrections, and corrections required for compliance with the municipal code and Wisconsin statutes are made prior to recording.
Guzekowski will second.
Roll call beginning with Commissioner Kipchinsky.
Shinsky, aye.
Lorik, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hannah, aye.
Thank you. That brings us to 7C, plan review. Review site, building, landscaping, and related plans submitted by Tracy Erickson Enterprises LLC for a car wash facility on the property at 140 West Puch Road. Lori?
Thank you, Alderman Lorik. The applicant is requesting site, building, landscaping, lighting, and related plan approval for the Peak Car Wash facility. Commission may recall approving a CUP in the last few months to operate a car wash on this property. This property is also subject to a 1975 PUD approval and a declaration of restrictions with the property at 8867 South Howell Avenue as part of a CSM 5946. All these documents were included in your packet for review. The proposed site plan on the next slide, thank you, Carrie, shows a 5,136 square foot automatic car wash building that includes an office on the southeast corner and a pet wash on the southwest corner. The building is oriented on the south side of the property. There's an access point to the property from Puch on the southwest corner of the site. There's a driveway that wraps around the south and east side of the site to access 3 drive-through lanes with payment kiosks. Parking and vacuums are in the central portion of the property, which will provide some ability to hide it with the proposed building. The lot and proposed building meet all dimensional requirements and setbacks. The plan shows that the layout of the site will preserve cross-access over the property at 140 West Puch for the benefit of 8581, 8645, and 8667 South Howell Avenue to the median opening on Puch as requested per WISDOT. The narrative provided for the CUP stated that a maximum of 8 to 10 employees will be on site for any given shift and that the operations are expected to be from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily for the car wash, self-service pet wash, and vacuums. The company anticipates between 200 to 400 customers per day at the site. Because the CUP was recommended for approval for the adoption of the new zoning code, but the conditions and restrictions reference the code as amended, staff are reviewing the plans with a hybrid approach. Under the previous code, minimum parking requirements for car washes were calculated at 1 stall per employee on site during the largest shift, plus sufficient space for at least 4 waiting vehicles at washing stalls and for drying 2 vehicles after each washing stall. This would result in a minimum of 10 to 12 required parking stalls. But under the new code, minimum parking requirements are calculated at 1 per car wash stall with a maximum allowance of 20% over the minimum requirement. Since this would limit the site to a single stall due to the single bay car wash, staff is recommending that the previous code apply. The old and new code do not specify requirements for pet grooming or wash facilities. However, since only 2 self-service bays are available in the pet wash, the 28 proposed on-site parking stalls exceed the requirements for both the pet wash and the car wash. The 3 drive-through lanes on the north control control access to the single lane car wash building. Per current code, minimum stacking requirements for car washes are 5 per car wash stall. Each stacking lane shall have a minimum depth of 20 feet per stacking space, and each lane shall be a minimum 10 feet wide. These plans do not include the depths for the stacking lanes. However, the way the plan is laid out, it appears that these meet requirements. There are no details for the kiosk, which will be required to be submitted with revised plans prior to the permit application submission. And Carrie, if you don't mind going to the next, thank you. The entire building is proposed to be constructed with 4-inch brick veneer, CMU, and precast stone. Per the old code, brick must be a minimum 4 inches. The current code requires masonry in specific percentages for front, exterior side, interior side, and rear elevations. However, a minimum depth of 3 inches for masonry and stone veneer systems is acceptable. EIFS as accent materials are shown at the bay entrance and exit. A standing seam metal roof is proposed for the southeast tower. Prefab metal awnings and vinyl coverings are proposed on the north elevation above the dog wash and office entryways. Staff recommends additional articulation or awnings over the windows on the south facade as they face buttes. No mechanical equipment outside of the vacuum pump house enclosure was identified on the plans. No details were provided for the enclosure. Staff has included the submittal of these details as a condition of approval. Likewise, all ground, building, and rooftop mechanical units, utility boxes, and transformers must be screened per code, and this requirement has also been included in the recommended conditions. In the center of the lot, you'll see a proposed trash enclosure is located near the northeast corner of the parking lot. No details on size or construction materials were supplied in the proposal. Code requires the masonry enclosure to match the building. This requirement has been included as a condition of approval as well. Signs are shown as placeholders and are not part of the review. Additional reviews will be required prior to permitting of the signs. Stormwater will be addressed using an underground detention system to be placed under the parking lot. Staff recommends that the applicant continue to work closely with the engineering department for all required requirements and permits. Water and sanitary sewers must be extended to service the lot per the requirements of the Oak Creek Water and Sewer Utility. A development agreement for the public infrastructure is required prior to submission of the permit applications. Lighting and landscaping plans have been submitted for review. However, lighting cut sheets for the fixtures and poles were not included in the plans and will be required prior to submission of the permit applications. The landscaping plan shows existing plantings along Buttes and proposed plantings to be located around the building and parking lot. Revisions are anticipated for code compliance and conformance with the CUP and will be required. With the aforementioned in mind and recognizing that staff will continue to work with the applicant's consultants on the outstanding issues, staff have provided a suggested motion for approval with the conditions mentioned in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to say? If so, please approach the podium, state your name and address. Okay. We will move to commission, starting on my left with Commissioner Hanna.
I'm having a hard time finding this on the map. Can you tell me exactly where is this located? Is it behind the gas station or?
Correct.
Okay.
It's behind the speedway.
So the access will be from Buttes for this facility?
Correct.
Okay. Is this going to impact the traffic or any trucking going inside that facility?
The facility of the gas station?
No, for the actual car wash. Would there be any truck used for the car wash or just?
That's not anticipated.
Okay. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thanks.
Commissioner Carrillo.
No, I like this design better than we had before, so. Yeah.
Commissioner Kupczynski.
Engineering just still has some concerns with the layout regarding traffic flow. And feel the entire site would work better if the access was on the west side of the site. So basically like flipping it, so kind of mirroring it. So it would be off of that access on the west instead of on the east. Something that had been brought up in previous conversations as well.
Alderman Guzekowski.
I kind of have a concern about the access too, and thought flipping it might be a better idea, but I don't know where it's at from that perspective. But other than that, I like the building design.
Commissioner Oldani.
It's better. I'm still not crazy with the layout myself. If not flipped, I'm wondering why when you come out of the car wash, instead of having to go left, up, and then, doing a U-turn, I still see a lot of bottlenecking going on there, especially if you're anticipating busy. Why, I mean, I don't know if anyone can answer this. Why not just allow the car to turn right out of the end of the car wash and then exit out? Unless there's a reason I'm not seeing.
It appears that would give them access to the parking lot with the vacuums.
Yeah, you can go either way, I would say. If you want to go then park and vacuum, fine. I'm guessing you're going to have way more people just leaving than going and parking. It's just, to me, I still anticipate bottlenecking going on at the main entrance up on the northeast when you start getting in line. I'd like to see an exit right out of there if it's not going to be flipped around. I agree, still makes the most sense. But at least let the cars the option to get out immediately when they're done and out to that's not the roadway, but the drive to the exit to the west. That's my 2 cents. I think you're going to avoid a lot of issues if you at least allow that exit straight to the right.
Commissioner Siebert.
I agree with Don. I'm a little concerned about the entrance and the exit at the same time. They all seem to congregate in that one northeast corner. And I could see a potential problem of people turning in there and taking a kind of a sharp turn and catching the person coming out. So I'm not totally satisfied with that entrance and exit that they have. Good.
Commissioner Chandler.
I do have a question for the applicant.
We don't have the applicant with us this evening.
So is anyone able to address the traffic flow issues that have come up and the access?
That would be up to the applicant. I apologize.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I mean, I have nothing to add. All the concerns seem to have been brought up. I guess we just need to discuss and figure out what our options are. And if somebody wants to make a motion.
Alderman Lorik, if I may, thank you. In the staff report, it was mentioned that the south elevation, the elevation facing Pete's Road, did require some changes to more closely resemble the north elevation, which is the elevation facing the parking lot. So if you could, Carrie, if you could bring up those different elevations and can kind of see where we're coming from. I just want to make sure that the commission has that discussion and that they feel appropriate that the architect for the applicant incorporate those same design elements in terms of the columns, in terms of the brickwork in the south elevation, since that's what's going to be seen by the majority of the people. And you can kind of see a very significant difference between the two elevations, and I like the north elevation, don't like the south elevation.
I agree. I mean, the south elevation is the one that's going to be most visible to all the traffic coming down Putes. Obviously, I'll let the other commissioners speak for themselves. But I would agree that the design elements should be required on both sides.
Is there a reason why they're not identical? Maybe we should hold on anything because we need a lot of questions asked.
We make a motion to hold this item.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Hold on, before we hold it, if it's voted no as read, they can still resubmit and make changes, correct?
I think it would be appropriate to provide the applicant with an opportunity to respond to the Plan Commission's concerns before you make a decision, given the fact that they are not here to hear what the concerns are tonight. We do always mention that we require somebody to be here to represent just for this very reason, in case there are questions or concerns by the Plan Commission that they can answer. So I do think that, giving them an opportunity to respond is appropriate.
Okay, not to be a smart, but they have that opportunity right now.
All right.
We're giving them an opportunity here and now. And unless, before I jump the gun, is there a reason? Does anyone have a reason? Okay, then to me, that's kind of unacceptable. I don't mind them not being here, but if they at least called and said, hey, well, we're not going to be there, here's why, or at least called in. This is their opportunity, the way I see it. And what would happen then? Let's say we want to give them another opportunity. They just bring it back to another meeting?
If the plan commission were to deny it, you'd have to state the reasons why, and it would have to be based on code sections why you're denying it. Then they could resubmit a significantly revised plan for review, but it's a brand new application. So they'd have to resubmit all over again.
Yes, I would, this is just me, but I guess I would advocate for a hold. Again, I'm all for, this is their opportunity, but I don't know what happened. I don't know their circumstances. I would hate to make them go through the whole thing if there was some type of an emergency that we weren't made aware of. I would lean towards giving them one more shot by holding it.
Oh, I can be a fair guy.
I agree with you, Don. Greg.
Somebody want to make the motion?
Guzekowski makes the motion to hold item 7C until future meeting.
Just hold it.
Just held.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call beginning with me, Lorick, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Eldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
And I.
Okay, thank you. And if the applicant is listening online somewhere, please work with staff to move forward on that one. That brings us to 7D, plan review. Review site, building, landscaping, and related plans submitted by Greg Policek, Summit Credit Union, for a financial institution with drive-through facilities on the property at 7853 South Highgate Avenue. Carrie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is part of the Highgate Plan Unit Development. This is actually something that may be familiar to some of you, as it was reviewed previously in 2019. However, due to various circumstances, including COVID, the building permit did not go forward, and basically the approvals lapsed. Also, between when the original site plans were reviewed and now, financial institutions as part of the Highgate development, and indeed as part of the new zoning code, no longer requires conditional use permits. So they can proceed with site and building plan review without needing to go forward with a conditional use permit. Again, this is a financial institution. It does have drive-through facilities. And again, it is part of the Highgate development. So there are a couple of considerations with regard to especially landscaping that we will get into. So on your, at your stations, there should be revised plans, hot off the presses, just got them this afternoon. These incorporate some of the staff comments that were included in the staff report. So there are also amended conditions that will be on the screen for consideration. So let's just go through these. The proposal is for a roughly 3,700 gross square foot credit union building that is shown kind of in the center of the property. Setbacks appear to be met, and there is access to this property via the interior PUD roads only. No access from Drexel, no access from 13th Street. That's actually shown as on the screen right now. The 3 drive-through lanes are kind of on the, let's just call it the northwest portion of the property. 2 are for a teller window and 1 is for an ATM. In the current code, and again, we're giving this kind of another hybrid approach because they did receive approval back in 2019 under the old code, and they have updated some of these things to comply with revised code requirements, and as also the landscape review for the master landscape plan for the Highgate development. But and in the current code, there is a requirement for drive-through facilities to have kind of like an emergency exit lane, if you will, a bypass lane. What we are considering is the ATM lane, which will not always be utilized and will not have stacking traffic to the extent that the teller windows and lanes will. And it is a little bit wider than the other 2. We are considering that to be in fulfillment of the bypass lane requirement, especially considering that was not included in the code back in 2019. The minimum stacking requirement for ATM or teller windows is 2 per. So there's a requirement for there to be 2 stacking spaces for each of the lanes. The minimum depth, again, is 20 feet per space, and the minimum lane width is 10 feet. This appears to meet all of those requirements in this updated plan. So those concerns that were raised in the staff report are addressed here. They are anticipating 7 employees and approximately 100 walk-in customers per day and approximately 200 drive-through customers per day. That includes the ATM. Minimum parking requirements are calculated at 1 for every 250 square feet, and maximum parking requirements are 20% over the minimum. So that would be a maximum of about 18. And these plans have been revised to meet that maximum. So we very much appreciate that those plans were revised. They've also added a bike rack per staff comment, and those pedestrian crossing areas are visually represented with striped lines on these revised plans. Also on the screen, the revised landscape plan, which appears to be in conformance with the overall master development plan for the Highgate development. Very much appreciate those being revised so quickly. And just as a reminder, Highgate still needs to sign off on the landscape plans just to show that they are in conformance. Turning now to the building, the architecture incorporates a combination of brick, aluminum storefront or windows, and ribbed panel accents and screening for the rooftop mechanical units. The ribbed metal portions of the building will require a 3/4 majority approval of the Plan Commission, just as a requirement of code. It's not an exception, it's just that requirement. They do meet or are under, excuse me, under the maximum percentages per elevation for the use of that material. So this is what will be seen from the north. So as you enter the facility or enter the property, and this is what will be seen sort of from Drexel Avenue. The building is sort of on an angle. This is what would be seen from the east. So as you're going westbound on on Drexel Avenue, and you can see the drive-through canopy there, and the west. So this is what would be facing roughly the Texas Roadhouse. This is an example of the architecture that we would be seeing. This is in Monona, Wisconsin. So this is an actual building. This is not just a concept that we're seeing. And a couple more details for you. The fabric sunshades that you can kind of see in this image here, these triangular shades, those are considered architectural elements, and there won't be any words or phrases or anything. There's 2 options that are at Summit's discretion. They can either have smiling people, as in this depiction, or they can have abstract geometric shapes. And for that comparison, if anybody is familiar with the Summit Credit Union location in Franklin by the Pick and Save that's over there, I forget what I think it's Wyndham Village or something akin to that is the development name. Those are the geometric shades that they have at that location. The signs that are shown on the building itself on these elevations, those are placeholders at this time. Although we did receive more details for the signs after the Plan Commission reports were sent out, we couldn't incorporate it, excuse me, we couldn't incorporate that review into this one for this evening. We do believe that there may be a requirement for a sign appeal at some point. We just need a little bit more time to figure out exactly what that requirement is. We also did receive trash enclosure details. I do not have a graphic depiction on the screen, but those have been incorporated. The one comment that staff has on that is with regard to the gate. They are showing a wood gate, and because we still have a concern regarding the use of flammable materials, even if they're treated, we do have that concern for potential for fire. We've been recommending that everybody incorporate non-flammable materials for those gates and the dumpster enclosures. So either composite, which one could argue is flammable or non-flammable, but something like that, or a metal gate. We're recommending that just to kind of, out of an abundance of caution, just one errant cigarette or, someone not paying attention, using something that they shouldn't be using. We've seen an example of an enclosure that has gone up in flames, so we want to avoid that as much as possible. Also, lighting has been revised per staff comments with regard to the shields, the locations, the maximum Kelvin temperature that we've incorporated. So those revisions, while not necessarily incorporated into the plans that you received, those have been made. With that in mind, the suggestion motion that is on the screen is the revised motion. We are still incorporating a couple of the conditions just in case there are any questions or if there are any revisions to the plans between now and when they are submitted for building permits. That would be minor. We just want to make sure that everybody is aware that there are still going to be conditions that would be required. But there are two conditions that fell off based on these new plans. So please read off the screen. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer what they might, provide any answers that I possibly can. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I will open the floor up to the applicant. If they have any comments to make, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg Policek, 115 North Ferry Drive, Lake Mills, Wisconsin. So I was here a few years ago where we did get approval by the Plan Commission. We closed on the property in January of 2020, and we were all set with our bid package in March. 2020 came and the pandemic hit, and we put things on hold. So we're back here tonight, subsequently seeking approval again. We have made a few changes, not many, pretty minor, and we've been working with Carrie to update the plans accordingly, and we've made the changes that she's recommended. So we respectfully request approval.
I'll turn over to the commission on my right, starting with Commissioner Chandler.
I do have a question for the applicant. With the majority of the changes, a lot of my questions were answered. I just have one additional question because in regards to the pedestrians walking area, it looks like you've added some items here. Can you share the details specific to the pedestrian safety?
We made, there was a walkway installed to the west of this property, and then we were tying into that walkway. And I will ask our architect, Austin, to address specifically, because I think he may have a question, a response according to the material that he used.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Austin Conrad, 5420 Preston Place, McFarland, Wisconsin. So in regard to the walkways, are you asking about the material change specifically?
Well, it looks like the pedestrian crosses have been changed, modified since our last review.
I'm not entirely certain what, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on which change we made.
Well, can you go through the details on the areas the pedestrian should use for safety purposes?
We have a connector out to the street there so that pedestrians and or bicycle access can be more safely brought into the site. Our bicycle parking then is right after you cross that exit lane for the drive-through is where our bike parking is, so that's very accessible and again doesn't need to cross very much traffic. Just keep people safe. And then we do have another high visibility connector that connects the two sections of the parking. Again, we just really want to make sure people are safe when they approach us.
Nice. Thank you. And it sounds like you may have a question about materials.
Oh, I wasn't sure if the question you asked was just about how it's arranged or the material change. One of the staff comments was just make sure the high visibility there. And so we've changed to use a high visibility paint to mark those pathways out, just so they're very clear where people should be walking.
Thank you.
Commissioner Siebert.
No questions.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just one question. I was trying to see if I missed it or not. Coming out of the drive-through where a car would start approaching that walkway, is there going to be a stop sign or speed bump or anything right there?
a wonderful question. Currently, we don't have a stop sign at that location, but we'd be open to adding such a stop sign. We typically don't do any type of speed ramps on the properties.
I think a stop sign would be very appropriate. You know, people are always in a hurry to get out of there. Not sure how we would approach that.
Typically on-site signage in terms of MUTCD type signage, we don't regulate. It would be something that, you know, either stop or yield or something that would be appropriate as determined by the applicant and maybe with some input from engineering if it's appropriate. But nothing that we would necessarily require. I mean, the requirement that we have here is definitely for making sure that that pedestrian crossing is visible. So we do appreciate the high visibility markings that were placed on the pavement there. Encourage it, but there's nothing in the zoning code per se that would require that particular type of signage. It might be something in another section of code that I'm not aware of, though.
Okay, I guess we could call it a strong recommendation. I prefer a stop sign because I think yield signs sometimes people read as you don't need to stop. And stop sign is very clear what you should be doing there. So that's my recommendation. I guess that's what we'll have to go with.
If you still have a comment, sir, we need you on the microphone.
It's not a problem. We have added that at other locations.
For the record, the applicant has indicated an approval of using some kind of material of signage there and has been used in other locations.
Thank you.
I'm satisfied. Thank you. That's it.
Alderman Guzekowski.
No questions.
Commissioner Kupczynski.
No comments.
Commissioner Carrillo.
Nothing for me.
And Commissioner Hanna.
Nothing here.
Okay. The only thing that I'll add, it didn't sound like there was any concern or anything over the ribbed metal. That's what's required is the 3/4 majority. I think it looks good. I have no concern over that. And then as far as the banners, was that brought up because they're asking the commission's opinion on that?
We want to make sure that it's clear we are not considering these to be signs. We're considering them to be architectural elements.
Okay. And I have no other concerns or questions, so we'll look for a motion on item 7D.
Holdani moves that the Plan Commission approve site and building plans submitted by Greg Policek, Summit Credit Union for the property at 7853 South Highgate Avenue with the following conditions. 1, that all relevant code requirements and conditions of the planned unit development remain in effect. 2, that the plans are revised to include dimensions for the drive-through lanes. 3.
Mr. Holdani?
Yes.
Please read off the screen because those conditions have changed.
Okay. How far back do I gotta go?
Condition number 2 should state that the landscape plans are revised.
Okay, number 2, that the landscape plans are revised to meet all requirements of the landscape plan and design guidelines for the Highgate PUD prior to submission of permit applications. 3, that the mechanical equipment, transformers, and utility boxes, ground, building, and rooftop shall be screened per code. 4, that detailed plans for signage are reviewed and approved by the Plan Commission prior to submission of signed permit applications. 5, that the plans for the trash enclosure gates are revised to incorporate non-flammable material. 6, that all pole-mounted light sources are shielded and directed downward, that the color temperature of the fixtures are limited to a maximum of 3,500 kelvins, and that light sources are shielded on the side of the fixture adjacent to Drexel Avenue. 7, that all detailed final plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to submission of permit applications.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call beginning with Alderman Guzekowski.
Guzekowski, aye.
Holdani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye. Anna, aye.
Carrillo, aye. Kupczynski, aye.
Lorick, aye. Okay, item 7E was requested held by the applicant. So that brings us to item 7F, which is plan review. Review site building and related plans submitted by Gary Aheron, LabCorp, for parking lot modifications, outdoor utilities, and trash enclosures, and a covered ramp and stair on the west side of Building B on the property at 140 East Rawson Avenue. Carrie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the multi-tenant industrial development on Rawson Avenue that I believe the Plan Commission is fairly familiar with at this point. The proposal is, as was read by the chairman, striped parking stalls in the loading dock on the west and ground utilities and trash enclosures, as well as a covered ramp over the west entry. And this is for the LabCorp tenant space in the northern approximately 25,000 square feet of Building B. That's the location that is highlighted in yellow on your screen. That includes the building and the parking area or the loading dock area that we are going to be discussing. In the next two screens, I'm going to be showing the same site plan, just in a different configuration. This shows Building B, the loading area, the proposal, and the parking between buildings B and C. That's on the top part of the screen here. It's a little bit difficult to read because of the gray background, but the white area is incorporating the approximate area of the building that will be occupied by the LabCorp tenant and the proposed modifications to the loading area adjacent to their tenant space. On the screen right now is a little bit clearer picture of what they're proposing. What they would like to do is include striped stalls in the loading dock area. They would also like to incorporate an enclosure for some mechanical units that are ground mounted, and also a trash enclosure that is specific to the LabCorp tenant space. You can kind of see the location of the proposal to remove a couple of stairs and incorporate a ramp and modified stair that is covered by a proposed steel canopy. The other portion of this incorporates removal of existing loading docks to accommodate these changes. So this is what the kind of enlarged portion of that change would include. The chain link fence has been updated, and around the mechanical units, it's proposed to be a wood fence, a 6-foot tall wood fence. And around the trash enclosure, I believe they're proposing CMU. So the parking stalls in a block here are just part of the overall 34 that they are hoping to stripe. You can kind of see that there are a couple of about 4 parking stalls that are adjacent to where that new entry will be, and then a couple other parking stalls here. They are proposing to retain at least one of the existing loading dock overhead doors. On the screen right now is the proposed elevation. With regard to the loading dock areas that are going to be removed, they're going to match building materials. Then they're going to propose that ramp and covered entry, and of course the enclosures. One thing that we are going to be recommending again is the utilization of non-flammable materials for the gate, for the trash enclosure. We have no concerns over the mechanical units because those are not going to be things that theoretically and hopefully would catch fire. For Plan Commissioner edification, the lab is intending to employ about 60 employees over all shifts. The total number of parking stalls that they're proposing on the west side are 34, and that includes handicap. Removing 7 loading docks and the stairs to replace that with the covered ramp and entry. Now, as far as the trash enclosure is concerned, the original plans for the development in 2016 showed a shared trash enclosure on the north between the two buildings. As far as staff can tell, that was never actually constructed, so this is intended to provide for just LabCorp as a tenant space. We'd have to take a look at future trash enclosures for remaining tenants if that comes up. One of the requirements also is that any landscaping that is existing on the north elevation and anything that was included in the approved plans must remain or be installed. We are not requiring any additional landscaping or screening for these proposals other than what's there now. There's a very narrow margin, I think it's about 20 feet between the edge of pavement and the north property line in which to incorporate those landscaping elements that were approved back in 2016. And just a reminder with regard to the parking. So, back when the development was originally reviewed, the landowner and the applicant at the time had provided some information that over 270 parking stalls were going to be provided to be shared amongst the 3 multi-tenant buildings. And that was going to be adequate based on what they'd seen in similar developments. They constructed or striped for about 280 parking stalls, or at least that was what was said at the time. And 95 were designated to serve buildings B and C. Or 95 was to serve building B, and then some of the 95 parking stalls between B and C were also supposed to be utilized. What we have seen through every iteration of a conditional use permit amendment is that we have tenants in both buildings B and C that are continuing to use this shared parking arrangement. And while we've said that parking is going to be the responsibility of the management company or the landlord to ensure that all of their tenants have adequate parking, clearly at this time, it's not enough for one of their tenants, which is why the proposal to incorporate these striped stalls in the loading dock area is before the Plan Commission. What staff's concern is if we allow for particularly the group of about 28 parking stalls to be striped in this loading dock area, it impinges upon the ability of the future building A loading dock area potentially. They did submit, and when I say they, LabCorp did submit turning diagrams showing that the future building A, again, not constructed at this point, would still be able to accommodate trucks. However, we don't know exactly which turning movement they utilize, which truck they utilize. Is it a box truck? We're not sure. And there weren't specific radii included, so it's difficult for us to make a determination as to whether or not that still maintains enough space for the future building A to utilize loading docks. And it's a little bit difficult for us to make a positive recommendation entirely for those those striped parking stalls when we don't know what building A is going to include and when that might happen. All we know is that building A was included in the development plans that were approved, and they could, theoretically, the landowner could come in and ask for a building permit for that building A tomorrow. So that's a consideration. As far as minimum off-street parking requirements for laboratories, 1 stall for every 1,500 square feet of gross floor area. So again, this is something that would have to be managed by the landowner and their management company. I will say as an aside that staff have been contacted by St. John Properties to kind of discuss the overall tenancy for these buildings and whether or not the appropriate zoning district might change. We've not had an opportunity to have that conversation yet, but that will be ongoing. So with those considerations in mind, there is a suggested motion on the screen for Commissioner consideration. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carrie. I'll open the floor up to the applicant. Is the applicant present? Have anything to say? We'll go right to commission then, starting on my left with Commissioner Hanna.
I have no questions.
Commissioner Carrillo?
No.
Commissioner Kipczynski?
Nothing from me.
Alderman Guzikowski?
Nothing for me.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
No questions.
Commissioner Siepert?
No questions.
And Commissioner Chandler?
I do have a question. And it's in regards to what kind of laboratory is this?
It's a medical testing laboratory.
Testing, okay. And so what will they do in this laboratory?
When you go to the doctor and they order labs, this is the company that processes them.
Okay. And then my next question, did they have any feedback in regards to those stalls being in the loading dock area?
Their narrative kind of addressed that a little bit. I have not had any direct conversation with the applicant.
Okay.
There is a raised hand from the applicant in the chat. If we could get them to unmute.
Stepped out. IT stepped out.
Robert, if you can unmute.
Yeah, yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was just going to add that, so I'm Robert Sasson with Anchor Consulting. I'm a consultant for LabCorp, the applicant here. So we have had extensive conversations with St. John Property throughout the lease negotiations for those stalls in between the two buildings. The correspondence that I've had back and forth with Greg Fax over at St. John Properties is that the parking stalls, which were originally proposed by them, meaning St. John Properties, were not going to be an issue for any future building, for Building A. They've seen the turning radius plans, which were attached to the lease documents, and had no concerns, and those were the same plans that were shared with you, Carrie.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, you can unmute and speak?
Thank you. The truck dock expectations are to use box trucks, and the turning radii, the turning program that we used assumed all box trucks. The landlord has said this is not a distribution warehouse, which clearly it couldn't be, but it is for box trucks. The layout allows for box trucks and garbage trucks and vans to move around the proposed parking and get into the future Building A with no issue. Thank you.
Even if we could get your address and who you're representing for the record, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm with Gensler. We're in Chicago. It's 11 East Madison, Suite 300.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then one additional question. With the parking stalls that have been added close to the loading dock, what are the plans to help those employees who are parking in that area remain safe? Especially if you have a lot of trucks or these box trucks that are going to the dock.
Stephen, I've unmuted you.
Thank you. So the operations in the backside, this is sort of the back of the house entry. This is employees and couriers. So when the samples come in, a courier brings them and they deliver them to the facility, and the facility processes them. The couriers also take material out to the doctor's offices and the hospitals. So they will have both parking. So in that dark gray area, that just indicates where the paving is going to be have to be cut in order to make all these modifications and then placed back. But the parking slots that are against the building are primarily for couriers, because they come in and out at odd times. They're not for employees. And then there's a spot in front of the ramp where if there's a large van, for instance, they can also pull up there and then either go up the ramp and into the facility or up the stairs. But so there are bollards that are currently, we had discussed this, but there are bollards that currently protect all of the equipment on the left. But this frankly is like any other parking facility where you are in a parking lot and you walk across. The building in this area, the building is 4 feet, the floor level of the inside is 4 feet above the parking lot. And so as these cars nose into the building, they're faced with basically a concrete wall. So there are curb stops to stop the cars. So if you're between the curb stop and the building, you're fairly safe. And I hope that answers that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to speak, sir, please come up to the podium and name and address.
Mike Pialski, 251 East Rawson Avenue. I live right across the street from the St. John's property. My question is, how many of these vans are going to be coming, or the traffic that's going to be created by this, be coming in and out of this, going to this facility with this new lab here. So how many box fans are they talking about in a day? Because the traffic is already heavy in that intersection. I brought this up before. And this is not what it sounds to me. It's not just employees that would be coming to work here, but now we got another traffic situation where we're having more vehicles that are coming in and out of this area daily.
Stephen, you're still unmuted.
This is an industrial site. It's an operational laboratory. This isn't like an Amazon warehouse or anything. This is where cars or vans would come in to deliver samples from your hospitals or your doctor's offices. It's not a huge load, but it is running off. I mean, I think they're saying they are running several shifts, and this is really about public safety, and it's about being able to get the samples back to the hospitals and back to the doctor's offices in a timely fashion. So I don't have the quantity of what would be going in there. I assume that it would be a result of whatever health needs there are in the community.
So my question, or my concern is the traffic that's going to be generated by, that wasn't the answer. The answer is how many more vehicles will be going in and out of this drive entrance now that they're adding this to it. So that's the question. So, because that again changes the scope of just having vehicles coming to a warehouse and dropping some materials off and stuff. Now we have a constant flow of box trucks. We're still rather large vehicles, and that's again going to be a problem. And I'm going to bring it up with the other tenants on the other, where this whole intersection collides. It's pretty congested there already, and now you're adding this element. So I think the commission should take a look at that.
Right. Thank you. Yep. And if I heard him correctly, I believe he didn't have an exact number, but he did say, please correct me if I'm wrong, you did say this is going to be passenger vehicles doing courier service with these medical tests. I know that you blocked off a bunch of the overhead doors for loading docks. So that alone, I think, is decreasing trucks coming to your facility. But are you going to have passenger vehicles and passenger vans?
It's really up to who the couriers are and how they deliver. I imagine that most of them are going to be smaller vehicles and probably cars or vans, just like minivans or whatever. They don't have a lot that they carry at one time. They just have to, they have to get there in time so they can be processed in time. So it's not like you've got a lot of diesel trucks. There is one loading dock there that when there is a need to bring supplies in, the boxes of test tubes and things like that, or swap out equipment, they would be able to use that. That's not the primary traffic that's going to be here. It's primarily the delivery and of the samples and the taking them out back to the taking the raw material out to the doctors. I believe when the samples are done, they don't return them. They just file the report. So it's just incoming samples that get processed in this facility.
Okay, thank you. And I know he didn't say that he doesn't have an exact number of vehicles, but I mean, I would imagine them eliminating 7 loading docks is naturally decreasing truck traffic to this tenant at least, which potentially could be there. So that, I guess in my mind, that's a positive by eliminating some of the loading docks there, eliminating some of the potential truck traffic that would have been there if a different tenant came in. So any other questions from the commission?
Yes, I do.
Sure.
So
based on what the applicant chose this facility and the size, if he doesn't know how many trucks or delivery trucks are coming in?
The person that was just speaking is actually the consultant, not representing the LabCorp. But Robert, you are now able to unmute.
I can repeat the question again if he didn't get it.
Sorry, this is Stephen. No, the deliveries for this facility is a result of the number of tests being requested from doctors and hospitals in the region that this facility is supporting. So that if there is a pandemic and part of this facility is doing COVID testing, if there's a significant number of tests that are going to happen, there may be more traffic coming in, or certainly a vehicle is coming from a test site where they have multiple samples. So it's not more cars, it's just a bigger load that comes in. But
Steve,
go ahead.
Stephen, I'm going to mute you because Robert would like to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So I was just going to add, so you're correct that we don't have the exact number with us as far as the number of courier vans or potential box trucks that might be coming in. However, I can say that to the question as to how did LabCorp select this property, they know the volume of specimen that they'll be testing here. They have several of these laboratories all over the country, and so based on that knowledge, they've been able to assess things like head count, like parking requirements, like courier spaces, expected traffic, and expected box trucks. So that analysis, I'll say, was done in selecting this property. We just unfortunately don't have that, an exact number with us today in terms of the number of courier vans or potential box trucks that might be coming in.
I hear what you're saying. Maybe I'm just looking into it a little bit more detail, because I'm sure this facility can only accommodate so much testing samples that being brought to your facility. So I'm just trying to be curious. I don't want the exact number because that's not my purpose. I just want to understand, how did you even look at this and how many parking stalls? And you don't want like 20,000 trucks, of course, coming into this facility, because it's just going to be a big parking disaster. So, and I really don't want to know your day-to-day activities, but I just want to make sure that this facility, from the traffic standpoint, is serving your needs without impacting our community.
And I guess maybe to address that and further elaborate on Alderman Lorik's commentary. I mean, this was developed as a manufacturing planning and development. Any number of different permitted uses for manufacturing. Actually, this is a permitted use. As we've seen a lot of conditional uses being applied for here, this is permitted. So from this perspective of the amount of traffic generated, while there may not be a specific number, it certainly was designed for when the development went in. And again, to your point, Alderman Lorik, the removal of the loading docks further kind of clarifies that we shouldn't be expecting any real traffic situations in there other than passenger cars or vans being used for courier purpose. I mean, people don't use box trucks for couriers most often. When you see medical courier, it's usually a car or a minivan or something of that nature. So from my perspective, and certainly, I mean, the commissioners may have a different perspective, I don't know that the introduction of this company into that space creates any potential problems as far as traffic is concerned.
Okay. Just to clarify what you just said, this is a permitted use. So if they were making these modifications to the building, they could have just started operations. Is that not correct?
Yes.
So So we are reviewing this plan of the modifications they're making to better serve the need of the purpose that they're already allowed to do in the building.
That's correct.
Okay.
Also, what is the hour of operation of this business?
Hours of operation were not provided. Robert, is that something that you could provide? You should be unmuted.
Can you hear me? This is Stephen.
Yes.
I understand from the team that it is 24/6 expected, and that would allow 6 days of operational capacity to allow the hospitals and doctors' offices to function and get their tests right away. At this point, they're saying they don't expect to operate on Sundays, but if there is, let's say there's another spike in COVID and there's a heavier need for testing and turnaround, that may change. But typically, these sites operate based on the need of hospitals and the need of getting immediate testing results. They run equipment in here that does all the analysis, and then the data comes back to the hospitals immediately. So it's important. They have a need to help in order to help the hospitals and the doctors' offices. They're open whenever the other facilities are open and when the needs are there. But at this point, they're not 24/7, they're 24/6.
Okay, thanks. I have no other questions.
I do have one additional question for the applicant. So after the samples are tested, are they disposed of at this location?
The samples get picked up by Sanicycle and disposed of properly. So within the facility, the samples are collected and they are held in a safety room, biological safety room, and then there's a company that comes and takes them out, similar to what they do in hospitals. They take them out to a facility to properly dispose of them. They're not disposed of here.
Thank you.
And with no other questions, I'll look for a motion.
Okay. Seifert moves that the planning commission approves the site, building, and related plans submitted by Gary Adhern Lab Corp. For the property at 140 East Rawson Avenue with the following conditions: that all relevant code requirements remain in effect. 2, that the plans are revised to meet all code requirements for trash receptacles. 3, that all revised plans are submitted in digital format for review and approval by the Department of Community Development prior to the submission of permit applications.
Guzekowski will second. Roll call beginning with Commissioner O'Donnell.
O'Donnell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Anna, aye.
Bill, aye.
Chinsky, aye.
Lorick, aye. Okay, that brings us to our last item, 7G. This is a planned unit development amendment. Review a request submitted by Erica Nicole Harris, West Park LLC, for an amendment to the existing Oakview Business Park planned unit development affecting the property at 200 West Oakview Parkway. Carrie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is part of Oakview Business Park, and while the part of the request is to amend the general development plan that affects the entire park, it's really very specific to 200 West Oakview Parkway. So we are going to be focusing on this particular parcel. There are some amendments that have been requested that affect open space landscaping, the landscape area for this parcel, and parking lot screening. Specifically in the current PUD, this is the general development plan as it pertains to the parcel in question. Now, in this graphic, it shows the parcel as 2 distinct parcels. And you can see that there are woodland areas identified by the lighter gray, and wetland areas is identified by the darker gray. The GDP, or the General Development Plan, was approved in 2014 as part of the original and as part of the revised PUD under which we are currently reviewing items in Oakview Business Park. The woodland area encompasses approximately 6 acres of the overall site of approximately 8 to 9. At the last CSM that was recorded, which was CSM 9131 in your packets, that was following the last PUD revision, and that incorporated 8.2 acres as the overall site. That includes the woodland and the wetland and the potentially development area. Wetlands were shown on the CSM. However, the woodland area was not. So this is what was recorded, showing a larger site instead of 2 smaller parcels. We've recently been in discussions with Spark, who's the landowner, and a potential user of the property, a developer. And the question arose as to what extent the proposal would be subject to the old code versus the new code. So with that distinction, there is a requirement now, as we know, for a tree identification, inventory, preservation, and kind of a replacement plan for anything that would be removed. And that was really the crux of the question. Wetlands, we know what the requirements are going to be in terms of, DNR permitting, Army Corps of Engineer review, et cetera. But it really has to do with the woodlands on this particular site. The conditions and restrictions that are part of the PUD speak to parking lot landscaping and not tree preservation specifically. However, the PUD conditions and restrictions that were based on the old code were incorporating the section of code that states that woodlands shall, to the greatest practical extent possible, be protected with an overall development plan for the property. And it goes further in your packets as to what the remainder of that requirement is. Part of the property is also in a partially located in an isolated natural resource area, and that is identified in Sewer Pac's plan. And while that identification is not necessarily prohibitive in terms of development of the property, it is something that is cautionary, as we've seen Sewer Pac's environmental corridors come up in a couple of recent applications that have been before this commission. Wetlands, again, are on the property. They are under the jurisdiction of the DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers, so any approvals for impacts to those wetlands must come from both. And staff do recognize that within the overall park, there are more than 48 acres of woodlands, wetlands, and open space. That's in addition to the 8 acres of Marty Ann Park, which was dedicated to the city prior to Oakview Business Park opening. So any modifications to this isolated natural area, including the woodlands, would actually serve to implement a broader version of the business park, including those implications to the TIF that affect the property. They are supported by planning staff to the extent that we can have continued discussions with the landowner and the developer regarding requirements and potential compromise with regard to the tree preservation and relocation or, planting elsewhere in order to accommodate some of those requirements. In the staff report, it mentions just how many of the trees exist in a preliminary inventory, which is on the screen right now, and what the replacement schedule would be. So that's where the compromise comes in, because we recognize that approximately 300 trees cannot be accommodated to be relocated on this property. Could some amount of trees be relocated elsewhere in Oakview Business Park, or perhaps, on an adjacent lot or somewhere else? That's something that we would like to be able to retain the ability to have the conversation with the developer on. And I've been informed that both West Park and the developer are completely in agreement with staff regarding landscaping that would be required for the development itself. That would not just be limited to landscaping of the parking lot. That would be in conformance with what's been consistent throughout the park in terms of the application of landscaping standards for each site. So we have a proposed general development plan that would effectively remove the identification of the woodland area. And also it removes the wetlands that are on the property. One little asterisk there is that obviously, because we are looking at DNR and core approval, that would impact whether or not those wetlands would remain or if they could be removed altogether. So just that cautionary tale there. On the screen right now is the proposal, and it's all conceptual at this point, for the development of the property, and it includes that initial tree inventory. So you can see wetlands are on the property on the southeast and on the southwest and the northeast. And then each of those little dots represent a tree as part of the inventory that is per the code, meaning that's a different caliper. The different colors and the different sizes are different calipers of trees that have been identified. Minimum 12 inches per code have to be included in the inventory. So this just gives you a visual depiction. And without that tree inventory, this is the proposed concept plan. So you can see that there would be some wetland impact, particularly for any kind of expansion of the initial development of the property. But it gives you an idea of what is what the concept would be for this property should the proposal to amend the PUD move forward, again, in consideration of what staff would like to retain in terms of that compromise discussion. So to clarify, the site plan review, as per the conditions and restrictions for Oakview Business Park, would be under the previous code when it comes to landscaping requirements. The exemption from section 170505, that's the compromise. There's nothing in the language, nothing in the proposal that has been submitted as part of your packets in terms of the requested changes to the conditions and restrictions that would compromise or contradict the previous landscaping requirements in the previous code. So with that in mind, this is a very long two-part motion, but I'd like to turn it over to Director Seymour for any additional comments.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. This really comes down to the overall vision for the park, and as the applicant will probably further clarify for you, when the park was developed, the regulatory framework and the permitting of this parcel, in particular the wetlands, didn't really sync up with the original permitting, and there were other wetlands on the property, but they just weren't addressed at the same time. That's why they were shown in this parcel that was aside from the buildable area. They will tell you that it was always the intent to develop that parcel, and which, we're not going to dispute that, but the fact that it was shown in one way in the general development plan kind of created a little bit of an issue. So this would clear that up, clear up the intent, that it is the intent to, again, with any permitting required through the DNR, what have you, that this lot would be available for development in accordance with the standards for the rest of the lots in the development. That's really our goal, as well, as to provide a consistent framework to be applied across all the lots in the development. We don't want, there's probably one or two lots available in the business park, and we don't want to create a situation where, additional standards which are being imposed on one lot in the park that may not be imposed on the others. We want it to be consistently applied, and we think that the Oakview Business Park has been a tremendous success thanks to our partnership with this park, and we fully expect, and I know they do as well, that the development of Lot 20 will kind of carry on with that partnership and provide a build-a-suit building there that will be an asset to the park. So, I think we'd love to have that continued discussion about how tree preservation, fits in with this area, given that it is an isolated natural resource area. Now, we'd love to see some special attention paid towards landscaping, additional landscaping of Lot 20, or if there are other opportunities to work with the developer to kind of replace some of those trees either within the park or elsewhere.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any comments? Just need your name and address, please.
Thank you. Debbie Tomczyk, with Reinhardt Berner representing West Park. And as usual, your staff does an incredible job. I mean, it's always a pleasure to come to Oak Creek because you have such thoughtful commentary and a high level of dialogue. And as was indicated, Oakview has been a tremendous success and great partnership between the city and West Park and will continue to be so. It's also the case that it was a PUD that was adopted in 2014 prior to the woodland designation that I think just came into effect in March 22. I know there has been some confusion about the site planning and whatnot, but this really does implement the intent of the original PUD. We will continue to have the 30% landscaping that we've been able to bring 48 acres of green space. We've been able to bring a new park to the community, and we'll still have a buildable site. And as Carrie indicated, there will be a whole nother conversation about the specific plans for the development of that site, but we really need to preserve that it is a development that can happen, as Doug indicated, consistent with all the other successful Oakview developments that are out there. So it's treated similarly with the other projects that have been developed there. So we can have, well, unfortunately, I think all of Oak Creek, we're starting to run out of buildable land. So to be able to have one more viable and very successful industrial site in what's been a great Oakview business park and success with the city is something we want to continue to partner. And to be able to implement this zoning change, again, just continues the 2014 standards that were adopted for the remainder of the business park and gives us another opportunity to have the conversation about the specifics of the site. Wetlands cannot be filled without WDNR, and Army Corps permits would not be filled without that occurring. So that's not at all on the table tonight, just to make sure that we're preserving the same PUD standards for the rest of the successful business park to make sure this site, lot 20, can also be developed similarly. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll turn over to the commission, starting on my right with Commissioner Chandler.
Well, I do have a question for the applicant. Okay, so with the removal of the woodland designation, what activities are planned to help eliminate any of these implications that were identified, such as implications to the grading, drainage, utility, etc.?
So the woodland, it's a little bit gray area to us as to whether or not the woodland designation should apply, since this was a PUD adapted in 2014 prior to that. So the woodland designation that came into effect March 22 probably doesn't make sense in the context of a 2014 PUD for a business park that was adopted. But the PUD overlay standards that were part of Oakview, which include 30% landscaping, which include the landscaping plans be approved by this commission and by staff, that require that we have overall 30% in the entire park, and which has resulted in 48 acres of green space plus a new publicly dedicated park. All of that will still remain in effect.
And perhaps maybe if I can answer that, get to something that's probably, I'm not sure if it was directly your question or not. When the plans for the park, specifically the stormwater management plans for the park were created, given the fact that these wetlands were not being permitted at that point in time, they did not necessarily account for that area as developable in the stormwater management plan. So as part of this, it's going to be as part of the site plan, not necessarily a part of the amendment to the PUD, but engineering utility staff is going to be reviewing the changes to the plan such that they do make sense and meet our requirements for stormwater management in light of the full development of this parcel.
Thank you.
Commissioner Siebert.
I have a question and just trying to refresh my memory. Do we still have a dedicated park on that facility?
It's Marty Ann Park, and that was actually kind of an isolated park prior to the creation of Oakview Business Park. So it was dedicated to the city, but it was only foot access at the time.
So it's still there?
It's still there. It's preserved. It's dedicated to the city. The city owns it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
No questions, just this is not, this isn't the glamorous stuff that comes through planning commission, but super duper important. Staff really rely on staff for this kind of thing, and you can tell they're really invested in this. So I have no questions, and thanks for all the hard work.
Alderman Guzekowski.
No questions.
Commissioner Kipchinsky.
No comments. Doug did a great job of expanding on the stormwater management from engineering. Thank you.
Commissioner Carrillo. Commissioner Hannah. Okay.
Nothing here.
Okay.
My mic was off.
The only, I guess I just have a couple questions, comments. Maybe clarification, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the code update did not occur just recently, would we even be here?
Well, the woodland area is identified in the general development plan. It's the tree preservation, removal, and inventory plan that's part of the new code, which is part of the question why we're here tonight, is the PUD didn't actually state anything in terms of requirements for preservation of woodland areas, even though it's identified on the general development plan. And there's a question of whether or not new code, old code applies here. We have the ability to kind of compromise a bit here, and what the requirement is in terms of tree preservation and relocation or planting elsewhere. That's kind of like a hybrid situation, because under the old code, the requirements were for, to the extent possible, kind of preserve these areas. Well, it wasn't shown on the CSM, and this lot has not been brought before us for any kind of development proposal until now. And it's one of those things about where is the line in terms of what code applies. So we do have some requirements in the PUD itself. What they're asking for is kind of like cleanup and just a little bit of a clarification as to what would apply. So,
yeah, I mean, just maybe to further clarify that, I mean, the fact that this area was shown as a separate not parcel, but identified separately as part of the general development plan, that really was, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to say that the plans for this parcel conform to the general development plan because of the presence of that woodland area. So, I mean, it's really, again, the intent, as it's been expressed, has been always to permit that away to the extent that it was necessary. And this kind of cleans up that language so that there's no question that lot 20 is entirely buildable, again, permitting questions notwithstanding. So we just need the general development plan and the PUD to reflect that and remove that so there's no conflict.
Okay. So, I mean, back in 2014, this lot was always planned to be developed. They weren't going to keep it live.
Well, that may have been the intent. That was not the way it was illustrated in the adopted general development plan.
Okay.
So in the general development plan that's on the screen right now, that was part of the 2014 review. You can see that there's a woodland area as a separate parcel. And then that kind of square that's on the corner there, that's mostly open. I think the designation of woodland was, at least from staff's perspective, the area to be preserved, whereas the corner was the lot to be developed.
I do think from West Park's perspective, they always intended to develop that lot.
Okay, and then as far as your discussions in the future with the tree, I'm always proved a liar when I say things like this, but nobody in the city is going to say we have too many trees. So definitely any discussions you can have to replant trees elsewhere. Looking at the concept plan of the site, I don't know that you can require it, but if there's a way to keep some of the trees that aren't necessarily impacted by cement and building, that'd be great too. But definitely relocating, as you already stated, somewhere else in the business park, even if West Park's willing to do it in neighborhood or city parks, just to get more trees. It's definitely a good thing. So, but as far as the agenda item, I have no issues after the discussion. So we will look for a motion if there's no other questions.
Ladani moves that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approve an amendment to General Development Plan governing the M1 PUD for the Oakview Business Park. Tax keys as listed, that would A, remove the woodland designation from the property at 200 West Oakview Parkway as depicted on the amended general development plan, and B, amend the conditions and restrictions relating to open space, landscaping, landscape area, and parking lot screening, such that municipal code section 17.0505 shall not apply and that the landscaping standards in effect prior to March 15, 2022 shall apply to all parcels within the planned unit development after a public hearing subject to the following conditions. 1, it is the responsibility of the property owner to secure any permits or approvals for impacts to on-site wetlands and isolated natural resource areas prior to the commencement of any site disturbing activities in those areas. 2, that any changes to approved grading, drainage, utility, or stormwater management plans be approved by the city engineer prior to the insurance of any building permits or site disturbance.
Guzekowski will second.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Seipert.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
And no.
Bill, aye.
Shinsky, aye.
Lorik, aye. And that will bring us to announcements and adjournment. Any announcements? I know the farmer's market is usually plugged this time.
Do you know when it is?
Saturday.
It's the Saturday is the very first farmer's market.
Okay. So everybody visit the farmer's market on Saturday.
Yes. Starts at 9 a.m. till 1 p.m.
Seifert seconds. I threw that in just to throw her off.
So if there's no other announcements,
What's going on?
thank the staff as always on the work done.
Did we get all the ayes in on that?
Who was the last person to cast a vote?
Started with C. What did I not say?
I think Chris and I still have to, yeah,
Well, you didn't vote.
no.
Two more votes for that.
Yeah.
Guzekowski, aye.
Voldani, aye.
There you go. Thank you for being an eagle eye.
Okay, and if there's no other announcements, we will look for a motion to adjourn.
Miller moves to adjourn at 7:57.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Chandler.
Chandler, aye. And aye.
Grillo, aye.
Shinsky, aye.
Lorik, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Voldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Okay, thank you.